All right, gang, let's work through the practice problems on our 1.3b lesson using the distance formula, reminding you of what our objective, our goal is for this lesson. We want to find the length of a segment using the distance formula. So let's pause this right here and then jump ahead to the bottom of the page so that we can get to the practice problems. All right, let's work through our practice problem. Here we are going to be using the distance formula. For this question, they ask us to find the length of AB, and they want us to use these 2 points, A and B, and I have already taken those points and put them on the graph. A is down here on the right, 5, -2, and B is up here on the left at -3, 3, and I have already drawn in my little triangle. Remember that we are going to be using our distance formula, where we do x minus x, square that, and y minus y, and square that. And really, x minus x is this x distance right here from left to right, so we can count those squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And y minus y is really this distance right here, and we can count those squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or we can take those numbers and we can use our formula. We can do the x numbers and then we can do the y numbers. First I'm going to do the x numbers, the -3 and the 5. -3 minus 5, and if I do that, that gives me -8, and I'm going to take that guy and square it. And then I'm going to do the y numbers, +3 and -2. +3 minus -2. And when you subtract a negative, remember that's adding. So when I do that, I get 5, and I square that. Notice that we have over here the 5 and the 8. The 5 and the 8 that we have here. Then we take those numbers and we square them. 8 squared is 64, and 5 squared is 25. Then we have the plus in the middle. And then ultimately we will be taking the square root. When I take 64 plus 25, that gives me a grand total of 89. And I take the square root of that, and when I do that on my calculator, I get about 9.43. So, I have a bar up there. We talked about that. That shouldn't be there, right? So what is the length of AB? Well, it is the square root of 89. If you like decimals, you could write 9.43. One thing that I really want you to think about is what is the last step to finding the distance between any 2 points, and that is the square root. That is one of those things that students forget often. So make sure that you got that down. When you're taking a distance, you always square root at the very end. Now let's look at question B. And they get us going on that. Again, I'm going to have you pause this guy and take a second and get that graph, and then I'll come right back. All right, for question B, they ask us to find the midpoint and the distance between C and D. And here's my C point and my D point. Again, I've already put those on my graph. Oops, D is down here. I've already drawn my lines on there. My distance formula is where I count the spaces in both directions, and I take those numbers, I square them and add them and take the square root. So that gives me, let's see, what, 36 plus 36. That gives me the square root of 72. And on my calculator, that tells me that CD is about 8.48 spaces. Let's review midpoint. And remember, midpoint, we use the same diagram, but instead of counting the spaces, we use that to find the middle. 3 spaces on each side gives me the middle, and I take that down. And again, 3 spaces on each side gives me the middle, and I take that in. And where those two connect is where we have the midpoint. we measure the midpoint from the origin, and that would be over 0, up 1 space. My midpoint is 0, 1. To do that using my formulas, remember we take the average. So that's where we take these two x numbers, -3 plus 3, and then we divide that by 2. We get 0 divided by 2. There's my 0. And then we do the same with the y's. We take these guys up here, 4, -2, 4 plus -2, and divide that by 2. That gives me 2 divided by 2, which equals 1. Right there is the midpoint, 0, 1. You can do that either way, and you will get the same answer. What I want to make sure that you do is, for sure, study this problem for the test. I will ask you to either do midpoint or distance or both on the test, so make sure that you get that studied. One last question that I want to point out here is we do have this word on the side, and these are always things to think about. What is another word to describe the midpoint? And what does the midpoint do to that segment? Remember, it cuts it into 2 equal parts. And that is the bisector. So bisector and midpoint, they are synonymous. They do mean the same kind of thing. See you tomorrow.